Okay. So thanks you guys for joining today. Many of the names I recognize from the last two versions of this that we did. If you're new to this and it's the first one you're joining, this is our 2025 Summer Canada Games Coach Enhancement Series for all of Atlantic Canada. So it's an opportunity for coaches just from the Atlantic region that are going to Canada Games or are involved in a Canada Games team to come together and have some shared learnings, learn from others, learn from each other, and have us bring a little bit of more, not as much information, but more things for you to consider as you move towards your games. As we've discussed in the last two sessions, which also to let you know, there's recordings for those. So if you happen to just be joining today and miss the last two and want that information, it's fully available for you. But over the last couple, we've really talked about what does the run up to the games look like? What should you be thinking about? And we had a little bit of a chance to connect, and hopefully you'll start to recognize, especially the coaches within your own province, some of the names that are coming up that you'll get to connect with very soon in Newfoundland. So today's topic is the final few months because we are very close to the summer games. I'm sure you're all getting excited with sort of spring starting. We are in that final stretch. So the last time we talked, we really focused on what should be done in the planning process with, good 6 months out, and sort of we zoomed back and we had a much longer timeline. So today we're going to get into more specifics over just the next few months in the run up to the games, some things to think about, some new information to possibly hand your way. Whoops. Right, so that's what we're going to talk about. So just very briefly, if this is the first time you're joining, I just want to share, my name is Natasha Johnson. I do work at the Canadian Sport Institute in Halifax. Canada Games is a love of mine. I went as an athlete and then had the opportunity to go to 4 as a coach, 1 as a mission staff, both summer and winter. Really love the summer games. I think I said this last time, but you guys all picked the right season, in my opinion, to be coaching. The summer games is a much nicer environment to be outside coaching on the field. In the winter games, we had a lot of times where we were freezing and, minus 42-degree weather. So hopefully it won't be too blazing hot in Newfoundland, but I think you picked the right season to be out at Canada Games. So I applaud you for that. And it's going to be a really fun games in Newfoundland. I've been speaking to the group regularly up there. They are very excited for the games. If you didn't know already, they have named the 2025 year as the year of sport in Newfoundland. So you're really about to come into a really cool environment, a very cool games. Newfoundland was the host when I went as an athlete, and they did just a phenomenal job. And that was a long time ago. They're even more prepared now. They're going to do a great job. So quickly kicking it off, and then I'm going to hand it over to our guest speaker, who will share some stuff with us. This should be a reminder from last session, and if it's not, I'll quickly talk you through. But what I wanted to just show was that the last time we talked about the perfect plan, and we talked about the fact there probably is not the perfect plan, but that if there was the creation of one, it would look something like this. And what I wanted to highlight was that in the last time we talked, which was, early fall, we had just come into, for most people, their preparatory period. And so now if you look at that bottom little arrow, we've really shifted along and we're now coming into a bit of a transition period. And I just wanted to ask you guys and use your, what is it, your little, you can put up your thumbs up or your clap, whatever you want to use. Who has been able to get outside yet or get into a gym with their actual Canada Games athletes? Okay, Martin. Okay, so rugby has. Awesome. Softball started. Okay. For the rest of you, is that coming up in the next couple of weeks? KJ is. All right. Perfect. So we're really just at the start of this period, which is, that's great. So we're starting to get our teams together, which is perfect. I put this in here again if you wanted to have another snapshot. And for those who were not part of our last session, we talked a lot through this chart, which we're not going to get into detail today. But I just wanted to share it again. And if you remember last time, we were way at the top of the chart, sort of moving into the final 33 weeks before the games. So a little reminder to take a peek at this in your planning, see where we are now. We're about 19 weeks out from the games as of this week. So we have a couple mesocycles left. So we're going to talk about in today, what are the things you're trying to change within our new time? So last time we were talking about we still had 33 weeks. We had lots of things we could do. We're down to 19 weeks. So what we're going to help you with today is thinking about within that time, what are some of the things that we could focus on to have the best games experience for you and your athletes? And with that said, I'm going to introduce, Leo Thornley, because we're going to jump right into it. So who's Leo and why do we have him joining us today? So Leo is the Director of Performance Science in our offices at the Canadian Sport Institute Atlantic in Halifax. He's part of our leadership team for Sports Scientists Canada. If you've ever heard of that term or wanted to know what it was, quick Google, you'll see what that is. He's been involved with Canoe Kayak Canada since 2005. I had to look that one up, and that was an impressive one. So he's been involved with that group for a very long time. He was also a team member for the 2012 London Olympics, or Pan Ams, or was that the Olympics, Leo? I wasn't even clear on that one.
2012 London Olympics,
That's
2015
what I
Pan Am
thought.
Games, 2016 Rio Olympics. Yep.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, because I knew the 2016 Olympic Games, but 2012 I wasn't sure. So two Olympic Games as well as a third cycle as an advisor, and the Pan American Games. So the reason I asked Leo to come in today is I've seen him work towards Olympic and other major games with major teams, so national teams who have come out with huge successes after these games. So he's got a real great perspective on what does it take to get that team of athletes and coaches performing coming into the games environment, which is exactly what you guys are about to do. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to you, Leo. Just let me know when to advance the slide for you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Natasha. And hi, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to come and share a few pieces with you today. And thanks, Natasha, for providing the assistant role of advancing slides. That's awesome. I hope that there's at least one piece or something today that I can offer that's useful. Natasha, would you like questions to come at the end of my section, or would you like questions to come at the end of the whole presentation? Just a quick question for you.
I think end of your section is the most,
Okay.
so they're immediate.
Okay. That sounds great. Um, and so, great. What I wanted to share maybe was a little reflection on two kind of areas. And Natasha introduced me, and I appreciate the introduction, but I've been around and had the pleasure of working with a number of different teams, team sports, individual sports, endurance sports. I'm certainly a very passionate team sport person personally, having grown up in the UK. Played a lot of soccer and rugby. I volunteer as a coach for my son's U12 soccer group. So I'm indelibly linked in sport, both in work and out of work, as most sport people are. And I've had the pleasure of working with a lot of high performance teams and a lot of teams that are really passionate about trying to create success in a short period of time. So I've kind of categorized this first slide into two categories. One that kind of relates a little bit more to the periodization of the work, and that's kind of a little bit more to the planning and periodization of this final 4 month period. And what are the key takeaways that I believe are successful components in that period? They may seem rather simple, but they are if they're missed, then it's probably going to lead to a problem. Is another way to look at it. So sharing a clear training plan, and there's two components to that. Obviously, one is that you're sharing it, and one is that it's clear. Uh, the as Natasha mentioned, some folks are super planners, some folks are begrudging planners. There's room for all types of planners in success. The key components being that it is clear and that it is shared. So to all your athletes and if you have a team manager, assistant coaches, everybody knows what the plan is. The second point I'd like to make on this is that the word taper is a common word that's used to describe the final little stage of preparation, where you're kind of easing off the gas pedal a little bit in the hopes that you're going to get a bit of a rebound in performance as a result of it. That's the same no matter whether it's an endurance sport or a team sport or a combat sport, whatever those sports are. My point here that says taper from something is really to get across the idea that you need to have an increased body of work, a hard body of work, in order to then follow it with a taper. If you're not increasing, or if there's not an overload scenario that precedes it, then there is no point in a taper. So you do kind of, if you're considering tapering, and by that I mean a reduction generally in the overall volume of work in the final couple of weeks. It's just really the final couple of weeks. If you're considering that, then you need to look at the phase before it and make sure that you're coming down from something. Otherwise, you're just detraining. And then the third point is to respect recovery. In this final 4 months, as Natasha mentioned, the final 19 weeks, sometimes people can get a little caught up in trying to apply too much, or trying to do too much, or making sure that you're making up for lost time and all of those kind of pieces. Obviously, a lot of athletes within this group are multi-sport athletes, or have a lot of other demands on their lives. It's not just sport, which contribute to their overall stress and load. So being mindful of where in these 19 weeks is recovery. Where are those pieces? It's not just a hammer for 17 and then a taper for 2. There does need to be some respect of an undulation, or a loading and an unloading. And the unloading cannot be at the same time as a loading in something else. This is the unloading of everything in life, which is a luxury, but needs to be kind of looked after a little bit. So if you know your athletes, you know when those can occur. So share a clear plan, taper from something, and respect recovery. Those are classic periodization recommendations for these final 4 months. On the next, look at that. That's wonderful. Thanks, Natasha. This next category I titled Sound Principles. These are probably my top 3 for success in this period. And number 1 is maximize belief. That's your role in coaching, I think, in this critical time period in preparation, is if you're managing to create and maximize belief within everybody who's going, all the athletes, even parents, but athletes and assistant coaches and managers, everybody involved in the group, if you can maximize the belief that success is possible, then you will achieve so much more than you expect to achieve. Maximizing belief is also probably the positive term from the flip side that we often get in this part of the country, which is the Maritimes are small. We can't compete against the big gang, right? How do we possibly compete against the big gang? Even saying that, if we're perpetuating that concept in the final 19 weeks, then you're setting things up for failure right out of the gates. So trying to flip it to maximize belief in the concept that success is indeed possible if everybody believes it is. Some cool stuff can happen. The second one is the clear communication of priorities. What are the things that you believe as the leader are the priorities in these next 19 weeks? And does everybody know what they are? And the third one is, this goes for everybody, not just the athletes. Stay healthy. One of the most unfortunate ways to underperform is to arrive sick. And there's a few things that you can do to ensure that occurs. One of them is actually number 3 on the previous list, respecting recovery. And the other one is making sure the team's kind of travel practices are good. We learned so much during that COVID time about how to stay healthy. And the teams that have taken the useful parts of that information and continue to use it for some traveling recommendations of how to stay healthy, make sure there's good hygiene practices, make sure people don't share water bottles, making sure that if somebody is sick on the team, that they're masking or not coming to practice, or they're off to the side, like those kind of things that we were actually required to do a few years ago. Now we're no longer required to do them, but they still remain a good practice. So maximizing the health of your group that you're responsible for would be another excellent thing to do to see if you can, continually chip away at that. Okay. let's move over. This one I put in, if anybody's read any work or looked at training practices in various podcasts and various research papers, there's a chap named Stephen Seiler. He's a Texan, but he's out of Scandinavia. And this is just a nice representation of the things that we know in performance science that make a difference. The big things in the bucket and the little things in the bucket. So it's originally designed to convey the idea around what to pay attention to for endurance training, but I think the applicability of it actually reaches beyond endurance training. Um, Sometimes we get a little caught up in some things that we think are cool, and we spend a lot of time on those things that we think are cool, but we're kind of neglecting the things that we know are difference makers. So the big things on the bottom of the triangle here that we know are well established that make a solid difference. Guess what? It's actually just the amount of training that you do. Getting a decent frequency and volume of training is the number one thing that makes a difference. No matter what part in the periodization or YTP you are, that's the one to look after first. And then thinking about intensity distribution and how much high intensity practices you're actually including, we know that those make a difference. So in terms of including high intensity makes a difference, a positive difference, but making sure the distribution is appropriate and there's not all too much high intensity practice. Those are the three big things. If you're managing to pay attention to those three, you're taking care of a massive percentage of the probability of success. The other items where you're really a tweaking element of things as you go along, and particularly in this case, you can see that the tapering part is the top part of this triangle. It's a very, very small piece, and that also relates back to the previous point of tapering from somewhere. You've got to have taken care of the stuff on the bottom in order for a taper to actually make a difference. Okay. You can go to the next slide. Thanks, Natasha. I understand that in some of these previous ones, you've also talked a little bit about some periodization pieces, and obviously that comes up in planning, and it's a natural element as it relates to the final 4 months of or 5 months of what we're dealing with here. I put this one in just to cue your brains maybe a little bit. You're probably already thinking of it, but how do you incorporate all the different things that you want to incorporate is always a question. There's lots of things that you want to do. How do you put them in, and where do you put them in? Within periodization, classically, there's three types or models of how you put things in and how you mesh things together. On the far right hand side is your classic sequential linear periodization, where you spend a few weeks dealing with something, and then you leave it behind and you go to another few weeks of dealing with another thing, and then you leave that behind and you go to another few weeks of another thing. On the far left-hand side is the parallel type periodization, where you're giving equal attention to lots of different things. And when I say lots of different things, I'm talking right across the spectrum: technical, tactical, social, emotional, physical, all of those elements. And so the parallel component means you're attributing equal amounts of time and emphasis to a lot of different things. And then there's one in the middle that kind of blends a little bit of each, where you're prioritizing one thing, but still kind of working on others. This one, I believe, the emphasis approach is probably the most appropriate during this period and given your guys's point of the performance pathway for Canada Games, where you're prioritizing something in particular, but you want to take care of some other things as well, but you don't have time to do everything all in one go, and you don't have the luxury of just dealing with one thing at a time. So the question that's on this one is, how much can your group actually handle? So if you're going to apply that emphasis type approach to periodization in these final 19 weeks, how much is actually appropriate to be able to jam in there? I would highly recommend that you err on the side of as few priorities as possible. And I do that to help bring a clarity of purpose to your programming and a clarity of purpose to your groups, and be able to communicate what those straightforward things are. If you have 9 objectives you want to get every block, it's going to be tough. So my reflective question for you is how much of all of those items do you really believe your group can handle, given the other things that they're doing and given the other things that you're doing? I'm under no illusion. You guys are not together full time. Your groups are not together full time. You're not full time on this task. So there's lots of factors at play here. If anything, I'd like to give you a little bit of um, a license to do less, if that makes sense, if it's appropriate. And I have confidence you know where that balance lies. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. This might be a classic piece that you've seen before, and there's a slide coming up here that just highlights these three resources that I've used to pull from in this regard. But this one is the fitness fatigue model as a concept. Sometimes it's quite useful to use this model to convey to athletes what you're trying to do and to have a little confidence in the process. So in this instance, the horizontal line just represents, in essence, normality, no particular changes. On the left-hand side, you can see a big block of work. Let's say that's the last couple of weeks worth of work, of training that you're implementing. At the moment that couple of weeks stops, your fatigue is at the highest, and that's negative down there. You can see on the bottom. But over the course of time, that fatigue gradually dissipates. Right? If you don't apply any more work, if you don't do any more training, the fatigue is getting less and less. Unfortunately, the fitness is also getting less and less. That's the nature of detraining. So what we're dealing here is the balance between those two things, and the summation of those two things is represented here in the line of preparedness. So immediately after those 2 weeks, there's a period of preparation where your preparedness is actually subpar because the fatigue is so high. But as fatigue is off, your preparedness bounces back. And if you get the timing right, I wish you the very best of luck. It's not always easy, but if you get the timing right, then the preparedness bounces above where it was in the first point. So this is a nice model just to describe the amalgamation of those factors and to help give people maybe a little bit of faith that while they might be feeling tired, hopefully as a course of that fatigue leaving, they will feel more prepared. And their fitness will at that point still be higher than it was before. That's in Zatsiorsky and Kramer, and that's the very front of that textbook. This is a very word heavy slide, and I apologize in advance for that, but I couldn't think of another way other than providing you with these 9 pieces. And so these are elements. If you've had the opportunity to read this piece, The Principles of Sport Training, it's an absolute classic text. It goes across all different types of sports, and it really deals with the great preparation that has been learned over the years, particularly in Europe, for things, common elements of how things have gone well. The way they particularly phrased it in this one is errors in training. So what are the things that occur that resulting in underperformance that you want to try and pay attention to? And so number one, we've kind of already mentioned, which is, and it would be an error to neglect recovery. Number two is dun, 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 when the training demands are increased too rapidly for the athlete to adapt to. And this one is a danger of occurring when you only bring a team together very close to a competition as well. If you believe maybe that there's a gap in fitness, for example, for your team, and you don't have them for a very long period of time, and you haven't had the opportunity, sometimes there's quite an emphasis to try and increase that fitness in the time that you have people for, but you need to be mindful of the rate of increase. Increasing the rate of training too rapidly will result in underperformance. Number three is kind of doing the same thing, but after an injury or an illness. So if an athlete on your team is injured or is ill, rushing them back too quickly and applying an inappropriately high load during that return to play phase is another way to secure underperformance, if that's what you're looking to do, but nobody's looking to do that. Another one is the overall volume of training is too high. It's obvious to say, it's not that obvious to try and elucidate and tease out, but there are some things that can help give you that indication. One of the biggest indications in this regard is honestly the mood of your athletes. If they're a little bit boisterous and bouncing off the walls, things are probably going pretty well. If everybody is grumpy and chirping each other and pointing fingers and the blame game is more predominant than anything else, one of the reasons might be that the overall training is too high. There might be other reasons, but those are those are some classic indicators that might want you to drill down a little bit further after that. Number five is the overall volume of intense work is too great when primarily engaged in endurance training. So that's to speak to the intensity distribution of your practices, how much of your practices is intense and how much of your practices is easy. Number six is extensive attention and time spent practicing highly complex technical aspects with little opportunity for low intense aspects. So, making sure that there's a balance between highly complex technical pieces and low intensity, less technical pieces. Number seven is excessive numbers of high level competitions coupled with little supportive training. I don't think this is really too much of a danger in this period necessarily, but I'm not aware of everybody's competition schedule, and sometimes the opportunities that exist are trying to compete in a short period of time to try and learn a few things. I'm conscious that during this period, sometimes that's the only opportunity you've got is to get together during competitions. But generally, this speaks to a year's worth of training or multi-years worth of training. That if it's all competitions and not enough training, that's not going to work either. Number eight is the direction of training is extremely biased one way or the other. The golden mean here in terms of distribution is really a good target. Not too much of one or not too much of the other. It's the way Goldilocks writes her YTP. And then number nine is the athlete lacks confidence in the coach. And in this case, who perhaps sets inappropriately high goals, leading to repeated performance failure on behalf of the athlete. And the athlete then just perpetuates that lack of confidence in the program and lack of confidence in the coach and potentially their teammates as well. So nailing this also, brings us full circle back to some of those points I made at the beginning. Nailing the clear objectives and performance objectives and communicating them clearly and making sure they're appropriate while still maximizing belief. That's the dance. That's the game you guys are in, and I wish you the very best of luck with it. Those are the 9 areas in training. I think the next slide is just the highlight of those resources and where some of the pieces that I've shared with you today have come from. Enhancing Recovery by Kelman is a great book. There's some great Canadian content in that book. It's German and it's editorial stuff, but it's some great Canadian content in that one. Some practices of strength training actually has a lot of good applicable stuff even to things that aren't strength training particularly, but a lot of periodization information comes directly from strength training pieces. And then the Principles of Sport Training is a classic text, which if anybody has the opportunity to peruse, I would strongly encourage it. It's thick of so many different aspects of organizing a sports training. I think that's it of what I wanted to share with you guys today. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to entertain them. But hopefully, there's one or two things in there that at least cue some thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Leo, for sure. I think, even as I was going through it, there's definitely lots of nuggets there for all of you guys to make sure that we're considering in those next couple months. So opening it up to questions for Leo. Anyone have any? You can just unmute and jump in or raise your hand. Any questions? I do have one, Leo, that I'll throw out to you for that. When you were showing us the chart of sort of fatigue and then post a heavy block of training, how long should these coaches be thinking about, if they have a really hard workout on a Saturday, what's the time like generally before we get into the better preparedness?
If you have a really hard workout on a Saturday, you can have another really hard workout on the Monday. That's not a problem. You're mostly dealing with athletes who are relatively, uh, let's say, in the fast recovery period of their lives. Nobody's going to Canada Games in their 40s, so I don't think. In the most part, having a hard a hard piece of work on the Saturday means you can absolutely have another hard piece of work. There is also an element here. I know you guys are probably getting together for camps and concentrated
Mhm.
periods of time here, so you might get together folks for a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or a Saturday, Sunday, Monday, or things, and you might try and take
Yeah,
advantage of some long weekends and put pieces in there. So providing an overload stimulus within those 3 days is still totally appropriate. You can still do hard work every day within those 3 days. Absolutely. It's not a problem. You guys can be the judge of how long those sessions are and when you organize them. So, if it's last thing on a Friday, it's probably not first thing on a Saturday. If it's last thing on a Friday, it's probably lunchtime on a Saturday. So providing a little bit, and you can be artful about what other elements you put in there. So maybe that's the Saturday morning is when you have your tactical meetings or discussions or technique focused elements. So there is pieces in there, but you guys can apply a decent load each day during a concentrated period. The challenge is to know where your athletes are coming from. So what's the kind of state of readiness on that Friday? So when they come together for 3 days in a row, are they coming to you tired? Have they come to you from a whole bunch of other um, sports stuff that they've been involved in, or are they coming to you in a rested state? Because
Mhm.
that's going to influence that as well. If they're coming to you in a rested state, great, you can apply the hard work straight away. If they're coming to you in a tired kind of semi burned out state and you want to apply some work, you need to have a think about how you're going to do that. And you might have to adjust those sessions within that 3 day period.
For sure.
I,
Thank
I,
you,
I'm
Leo.
also I'm also I'm also totally open for questions after today as well.
Okay.
The end of this presentation doesn't cut off the opportunity to ask questions. So Natasha has my contact details. If anybody has any specific questions they didn't want to share right now, I'm totally open to just giving us a call or fire us an email, and I'll give you a call and we can chat about your specific question.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you guys all have my email, so you can pass it along and I can throw Leo's email. I'll give one more chance though, one more call out. Does anyone have any questions for Leo? No? Okay, awesome. Thank you, Leo. That was very, very helpful, very informative, and I appreciate the time you took to jump on with us. So thank you so much. I'm
Thanks for
gonna,
the opportunity. Best of
yeah,
luck.
thank you to all of these guys. They're gonna kill it. Got a couple of thank yous in the chat there, Leo. I'm going to keep going a little bit. So a couple more minutes to go through. So a lot of this, is going to be a little bit of a repeat, but to sort of emphasize what Leo was saying and to make sure we loop this into the stuff that we talked about last time. So going over the next 19 weeks, some of the things that we're unlikely to do in the next 19 weeks, make major strength gains. And this is, you can make good strength gains in this 19 weeks. I don't want to say that you can't. We're talking like you're not going to change completely the outcome of your athlete and what their, makeup is going to be. So their major physiology, but you can make a good dent in it. So make sure that, the teams are together training now. We talked about last time, they're probably doing some individual training on their own. This is a good time to check out how that's going, make some changes, see if what they're doing is working, and see what needs to be altered. Really great time to do that. Um, Making major technical changes, to Leo's point, it's a perfect time to look at where your athlete is technically. Depends on your sport. So a lot of this is a great time to do a lot of things in this space. But depending on the type of sport you have, you cannot completely change the athlete over the next 19 weeks. So if they fundamentally are not able to do certain skills, there are many complex technical things that will not be able to be taught in this period, but there is a lot of simple tweaks, things, more basic skills, refinement of skills. All of that is a perfect time to be done in the next chunk of time. Um, and then when we look at talking about mental strategies, so I'm going to look at both sides on this. So some of the things to focus on would be practicing mental strategies that have already been taught. So a lot of athletes, hopefully you've introduced, visualization, some goal setting, maybe some calming techniques. We're going to touch on those for coaches in a moment as well. This is a really great time to start practicing, talking about those, making sure the athletes know how to apply those principles. Possibly not the best time to be teaching complex new mental strategies, but certainly the time to be practicing those that have already been introduced. Some of the other things that it's a really great time to focus on. you and your athletes making solid nutritional choices. So again, this is kind of their peak time. They're in that last run up, double checking on, do they know, do they have the information that they need for that? If you're not feeling confident on that, go over to our YouTube channel. We have a whole bunch of really great resources that have been recorded from our staff on there's ones on, basic nutritional principles, eating for competition. There's a whole host of those on our YouTube channel. I'll send out the link when I send the notes in this. So if you're not super confident, or you want to send those YouTube links along to your athletes and parents, it's a great time to get them thinking about that and send them a little homework along that. Leo alluded to this. It's a really important time to maintain current physiology and prevent injury. So it's a really great time to kind of have your eye on the ball on those aspects. Focus on getting your group together to talk about tactical plays and approaches. This is probably the only time you have for that. This is your big time with your team. So spending some time on that. And then we talked about the mental strategies. And then we're going to put a little bit of focus on you as the coach. So, as Leo talked about with making sure you're not sick, really going beyond that and blocking some personal time out and practicing some healthy self habits. Some of the work that we've done with our coaches coming out of other games was they really leave, tired, drained. They put all their energy into this period. So thinking about now, before you come into the games, how are you going to keep yourself at your best? So how is your bucket going to get filled and stay as full as you can up to the run into the games, knowing that it will be a depleting period? So the more filled up that bucket is before we get to St. John's, the better that you will be able to perform for your team and support those athletes. The same thing goes for the athletes as well, of course, but I really want to focus on you guys as the coach around blocking out some time for you as much as you can and getting yourself as healthy, as energetic as possible. Moving into this time, if you guys have any questions on finalizing team rosters, a lot of you are probably into that final selection period. So we can have a little discussion on that if you have any questions, as well as communicating the rationale behind the decisions. This tends to be the time that starts to really come to a head. A reminder, we talked about this on the last call, but this is a really great time to make sure that we're communicating and setting the at games expectations with parents and athletes. So this is those conversations around while you're in St. John's and ensuring that both parents and athletes understand, what are your cell phone rules? What are your bedtime rules? When's lights out? When's quiet time for those athletes that have been confirmed to go? One that we tend to run into at games is parental, especially at games in the Atlantic Canada. When can the parents see the athletes? When do the parents have access to the athletes? And I've seen that flare up in a few different sports as issues. So setting that expectation now, is there one night that you don't need the athletes that they can go out for dinner with the visiting parents, or sometime during the day that they can touch base with the parents? Oftentimes, if the parents are traveling to the games, they do want to see their athletes, and we just need the coaches, you guys, to make sure that those expectations are very clear on when and how that looks. So you're not going to get your athlete and they've suddenly, run out for dinner with their parents and you didn't know. We've talked lots about planning the final preparation period towards the games and then surrounding you and your team with support. So we touched on that a little bit last time, but another reminder around, who is your support system at this time? Have you been leaning on your assistant coach? If you're an assistant coach, have you been chatting with your head coach, other people that you can reach out to if you have a manager, and just ensuring that no one person is taking all of this on over the next couple of months, that the load is spread. And sometimes it is easier to take it all on ourselves. So taking a step back and looking at this point and going, am I doing what I should be doing? Are there aspects that could be shared? Could this be spread out a little differently? So in that final 3 months, so once we get into next month, some more reminders, planning, and more planning. But this is really focused on now getting into the week of the games. So getting to know your environment. Hopefully you're starting to get some information from your mission staff and you're able to then share with your athletes in those last couple months about, what does dorm look like? What is the environment going to be like? What is the competitive situation look like? So what does your field look like? Are you able to show pictures to your athlete? Have you looked up the temperature? What are you expecting for the week? So this is really focused around now. Have you looked at that 1 week that you're going to be at the games and really gotten to know what that environment is going to be like for that week? And then the last few things that get to enjoy doing in the last couple months is getting your team really cohesive. Doesn't matter if this is an individual or a true team sport, both have to act as a team when you travel away to an event like this. So is that group cohesive, working well together and ready to perform? And are we getting ahead of potential conflicts? So looping back to that self-care for you, is there time in the next little bit that you're able to step away from the team or program? And that could be a weekend. A lot of coaches don't get many weekends to themselves, for their families, any of those things. So in the next 19 weeks, can you look and make sure that you have a weekend away from your team or program? Have you blocked off? Like literally, it sounds easy to take 2 days, but I know a lot of coaches who don't do that, and they're with their teams every single weekend for long periods. So I'll ask you now, can you look at that and just see if there's a chance and add some balance into your own life so that you don't feel that you're going, full gas pedal from now until August, because that is unlikely to lead you to your best performance with the team. Focusing on your healthy habits and then your nutritional and physical health, because again, like I'll just keep saying it, the more healthy our coaches are, the better you're able to perform and be there with the athletes. And we also know how exhausting physically the Canada Games can be. They are long days, sorry. You're eating at a big buffet of whatever. So making sure that ahead of time you're eating as best you can, and you're in the best shape that you can. There's typically a lot of walking, a lot of long days, a lot of standing. So have you gotten yourself ready for that, which is generally a little more intense than getting through a weekend tournament? And a quote from one of the people that we've worked a long time with, Danielle Poulos, says, teams don't perform well when coaches lose their focus, composure. So knowing your own blind spots and developing strategies to ensure they don't negatively affect the team's performance. And one of the things that Danielle always talked about is, getting yourself into the best place that you can in all aspects so that you can perform at your best and you can be as composed as possible. These reminders come from Danielle as well, and she shared some resources that I'm going to share on the next slide. So again, a little focus on you, which you can also share with your athletes. So thinking about managing that coach stress when at the games and in the run up to, but really in that week when you're starting to play and you're starting to get into competition, your athletes are likely to feel and recognize your stress. And I know for me at the games, this was a major difference maker. When I stood at the top of my course with my athletes in an individual sport, and you had those coaches that wouldn't stop talking, that were like very stressed, and it was very obvious that they were stressed, their athletes were also wired. Their athletes were emulating that energy and were getting themselves in a real balled up situation. They would then go out on the course and underperform. And you could see this pattern repeating. And it's very unfortunate because a lot of it does come from, what is the energy that you're giving that athlete at the start? So are you able to sort of set your own feelings and stresses aside at the top of the course or out on the field? Focus on breathing. What expectations have you set? What are the expectations you've set for yourself? And really knowing yourself. So what are your triggers? How can we work to make sure you're not triggered in those moments? Or how can you at least be aware of if you are triggered, take a step back, add some breathing, whatever it is to reset yourself. If you do want some resources, because this is always helpful, here's a couple here. And again, you're going to get this slide and you can click through kind of the areas that you're interested in. But this will share some anxiety reduction techniques. Again, good one to send to your athletes. A mindfulness one, fear of failure, and a self-talk. So again, I encourage you to check these out on your own and share with your athletes as you feel. So what we're going to do right now is in the last couple minutes, we'll give it about probably a 7-minute breakout, which is pretty good. And I'm just going to set these rooms up. So give me 1 second. And then you should be able to, I believe, choose your room. That's how this has worked before. And so one room, the conversation will be around conflict resolution. So this does tend to be the time right before the games where you can have a little bit of conflict. This is up to you guys. This is your conversation. So you could ask questions to the other coaches or have a chat around conflict within a team. This could be between parents and you as the coach while making decisions, like however you see that is fine. The next one is on team cohesion. And so that's, in this last 19 weeks, like, how are you bringing your team together? How are you creating good culture? How are you making them feel comfortable and getting them into the best performing spot that you can? Are there any questions before I throw us into a short breakout? No? Okay. We're going to go 7 minutes. It's going to let you choose the room, and then I'll bring you guys back. I have to assign the name. So I'm just going to call it cohesion and conflict. So you guys know which one to pick. There we go. Ignore the time. It says it's 18 minute. It's not an 18-minute room. I will close it before then.